Okay, so my talk today is called Grappling with the Data. And so, how do we define what data is and what grappling is? So how I define data is information. And so we must ask, when we take psychedelics, where does the information come from? And what does it mean? And more importantly, what does it mean to us and our life? And how do we deal with this data? Because it's very evident and obvious if you're have exposure to people who are taking psychedelics, that it does often take people a lot of time to integrate their experiences. And I'd say that integration is the real buzzword in the ayahuasca world. I think I'm aware of 3 people doing their PhDs in ayahuasca integration. So this is a huge issue. There are many people today who feel that the ontological, metaphysical, spiritual foundations that people approach psychedelics with is insufficient to deal with or process the immensity of the data, of the information, or however you want to call it. And the data can be very simple in terms of, if you smoke DMT or you smoke Changa, you might just see some geometric patterns or colors. And that's a bit like the first level. And I'd say a lot of people are not going to be particularly affected or transformed by that experience. It's going to be, oh, this is pretty. But that information, that geometry and those colors, they have meaning. They're not coming out of nowhere. Even if you presume they come from the brain, they actually represent information about, and the colors that you can see, especially when you take tryptamines like DMT, the colors themselves represent a pure form, say, 4,000 years ago. The only colors people now are inundated with all kinds of colors, but the colors and the brightness and the vividness of the colors represents a kind of information. So going back to Changa, Changa is interesting medium, and it's actually my baby that I conceived many, many years ago now, because it makes the DMT experience more available to more people. It's, say if you have crystal DMT, it's quite hard to smoke it. You've got to know how much to smoke. People will traditionally smoke it in a crack pipe, and it's very rough on the lungs. And normally you'd have someone there to guide you, and it's normally you either get there and you break through or you don't. There's no sort of in between. So with Changa, you combine it with the beta-carbolines, ayahuasca, vine preferably, and other herbs. And ideally, the other herbs will allow you to smoke the DMT and integrate that DMT experience. And ayahuasca will help integrate the experience and also lengthen the duration and often give a richer experience, which allows people to integrate that experience, because I think many can see that the ayahuasca helps bring the DMT into some sort of relevance into this realm. Say if you're smoking crystal DMT, it can be quite a cerebral, abstract experience, and you sort of come back and quickly the memories fade and you have no way of understanding what you experienced, except it was absolutely extraordinary and way out of the realm of your ordinary consciousness. So as an MAO inhibitor, I would say there's a spiritual, intelligent information in the ayahuasca. So in terms of grappling with the data, I think a lot of people don't grapple with the data. A lot of people don't really think too much about what they're experiencing. I've noticed particularly American people, for whatever reason, have a tendency to say, well, that was just a drug or just a trip, and somehow it's not relevant. Somehow it's not supposed to be taken seriously. Or we have this word hallucination. And hallucination, I think, is particularly relevant to LSD. But I remember when I was 18, I read Tom Wolfe's book, The Electrolyte Kool-Aid Acid Test, and he said a lot of the time, this is before I took LSD, a lot of the time you don't even have hallucinations. It's more like a feeling. It's more like an experience that I haven't really, that he said he hadn't found anyone had really explained properly. It was more like just hallucinations and things bumping out off the walls. And if you think back to before you took psychedelics, you might have thought that you would have going to see John Paul and Ringo and the Yellow Submarine and all kinds of crazy, wacky things. And this is not actually the case, especially when it comes to the tryptamines, which is what I'm focusing on today and talking about, because I think these neurotransmitters, largely DMT and psilocybin, which are very, very, very similar, allow a lot of data to come through the pipe. And like I said, a lot of people don't acknowledge there's any data coming through the pipe. They see that the experience is simply sense or rational sense whatsoever. And I think there's a lot of people out there, they want to remain credible. They want to remain scientific. But science is not a belief system. Science in its pure sense is simply a method. Science does not represent an emotional prejudice against people reporting or experience the other. And the other is simply the alien. And does it make sense that there's nothing else out there? I would say that makes no sense at all. This goes against the nature of reality, as human beings have posited reality since the beginning of recorded history. So I think we find a lot of people, they want to remain credible and they want to not posit the alien. But for me, I would say, and for many people, the alien ceases to become a big deal. The alien becomes a matter-of-fact experience. And it's also true to say, like I said before, that the alien just doesn't appear willy-nilly. The alien, the other, the sacred, you could say, it just doesn't fall into your lap every time you smoke DMT or you take high-dose mushrooms. And that's another aspect to it. A lot of people are simply not taking enough. I call it the epidemic of Piss Week ayahuasca. At these ayahuasca groups, people are not often taking a large enough dose of tryptamines, or even if they are, the ceremonial structural prejudices and egoic blockages normally coming from one guy who's supposed to be guiding the session is preventing people from having a true transcendental experience. It prevents people from being in a receptive place where the sacred can appear, where the other can appear, the alien can appear. So it is a fact that a lot of people are not actually taking enough to really experience the other, to not really experience the alien. And say when it comes to DMT, a lot of DMT that's been in circulation in the world is synthetic DMT. I'd say in the last 10 years it's been mimosa, but I have possessed synthetic DMT and then lost synthetic DMT, and neither myself or my friends were interested in it actually. But I do have had friends who have smoked it, and they said it was a simulation of the real thing. It actually wasn't full and rich and bright. It was it was like a synthetic replication of what the real natural DMT is, and the natural DMT is made by, the greatest alchemist on the planet, which is Gaia. What the humans do is going to be much more clunky, not as refined, not as intricately able to mesh and integrate into the human mechanism. So another aspect to this is, even if you do take a lot, and you do quite a lot, it's difficult for the human mind to comprehend and understand that there is an alien, that there is something else. And I've been giving talks about this subject for 14 years. And the first talk I ever gave, I said, it took me 670 times when I experienced these beings, for my conscious mind, my rational mind, my logical mind, my mind, whatever you want to call it, to simply let go and accept that what I was experiencing was valid data, that it actually was, and there is no other. And that's a lot of these beings that you meet, they will tell you that. But it's not as simple to say, perhaps, that what we are experiencing is just the individual human mind. Because I think when you go into the higher levels of mind, the mind is like a universal principle of consciousness that's connected to itself infinitely. So the idea of the individual mind goes out the window, but it's not the mind as the information processing device. We're talking more a Buddhistic sense of mind, a sense of consciousness really, which is that there is only a singular consciousness, which is sort of like Advaita 101, which is an Indian philosophy that stresses the non-duality of the universe. That, oh, it's only me creating this, right? That's very obviously another form of narcissism, guys. Actually, I would say non-duality is at once the most intimate nature of consciousness and the most, I guess, bafflingly infinite and huge and expansive nature of consciousness. But we keep coming back to this narcissism that seems so prevalent in our day and age. Maybe Descartes kicked it off with the term, I think, therefore I am. And it seems to me a lot of people in their minds are holding onto the rocks of the known, while the unknown rushes past them quite rapidly. And to make contact with the unknown and the great expanse and the expansiveness and the spaciousness can be quite intimidating. And the human mind, I think, has a lot of resistance to changing its worldview and its understanding of reality. And you have so many people in this day and age who believe that the scientific worldview of reality of human beings in 2016 represents some sort of gospel, like the word of God. It's like, if we think about how human beings will understand reality in 2516, surely they're going to have a much more expansive, deeper view of reality than absolutely. I mean, it doesn't make sense that they're going to have many things that we don't understand today, many things pretty basis for presumably human beings in the future will have a greater grasp upon, just as people in 1216 have no idea about so many things that we understand now. You know, simple stuff like radiation and bacteria and so on and so forth, and ad infinitum. We've got to understand we're in a paradigm where evolution is the name of the game. And for evolution to occur, there must be an unknown factor. There must be something more there. And so that all the stuff that people report when they take DMT and tryptamines, I believe a lot of it represents and can represent an understanding of, I call it like a teleological tractor. It draws us to understand there's something more there, that we actually are embedded in an infinite ecology of beingness. And this is the truth, and this is the revelation. And I ain't a spiritual guru, I don't think, but everyone has this experience if they smoke DMT properly. And that's very important. I think a lot of people, they want to be sort of dabblers, they want to be curious. You know, they're still embedded in the narcissism and the ennui. The mind parasite has them, and so their thinking is not clear, their conclusions are unsound. But I think when you come to understand the infinite nature of reality, and you understand the meaningfulness of it, you understand that that magic is only a technology that we have not understood yet. When you are brought to tears, when you are experiencing the awe and the thunder and the inspiration, then actually I think you're connecting to the truth. You're connecting to something beyond the nihilism and the consumeristic predator driven by manufactured drives, distorted drives. You're coming into a sense represents an innate ethical framework. It puts you into a place where you are more cognizant of the effect of your actions. If you think about the people who believe that all there is the kind of predatory game of accumulating as many gold coins as possible, and that all you can really get is what you can buy with the gold coins, and you think about the kind of boredom and the kind of limitations enmeshed in that animalistic framework, you can really have an understanding of how a lot of people in this world are operating and how they're thinking and what motivates them. It's coming out of they're like little kids trying to entertain themselves by manipulating and playing with the elements that have brought them to power, or the predator who wants to have power over others. Having an enjoyable time on earth and actually living your life, it's not about that at all. It's so far from that, it's ridiculous. And I'd say many people I've met have had the awareness that in this game, that everything that you do is being watched and observed and understood. And I think when you gain that insight, it gives you a sense that there's an innate ethical framework. And when you start to observe and understand reality and really listen, I think having these sorts of insights, and not just this insight, it's just one example of the many insights that you can have. And I guess you could even have this insight as a thought experiment, and having this insight into reality, that everything we do is registered and recorded and known and understood and put into the databanks. I think this brings us to be more responsible and more aware and more conscious, actually. And I think that's important. And I think this worldview that posits that us monkeys who just sort of randomly happen to exist, that we're the only ones, and our existence is inconsequential and what we do is not important, that we're just some monkey meat happen to randomly be in a planet, and well, we might as well just have, jump around and make the most of it in whatever way that we see that. I think that's a very dangerous point of view, and we're seeing in the world how dangerous that point of view is. And I believe when you experience the infinite ecology of beingness and you see what we're doing here affects other reality systems, can you believe how pissed off they are at us? Maybe you want to try talking to them. I've talked to them. Do you know how pissed off they are at us? They're pretty pissed off. So, sorry. But yeah, I would say this is an important factor, that really we have a responsibility to get our act together, not actually because of us, but because of universe and life itself. That what we're doing here has a meaning and purpose, and we might not actually see that or understand that. But with the right questions and with the right orientation and with the right receptivity, we can begin to understand what that meaning and purpose is. So it's interesting right throughout human history, and you look into Judeo-Christian reality, you got to wonder where did they experience these beings? Did they just sort of imagine them? Did they just one day sort of, I don't know, had some dreams and then decided to, I don't know, write some things down? I tend to think there's a good possibility that these people were having visions using plant psychedelics, especially Syrian rue and acacia, and that makes sense to me. I think it's quite arrogant to say that the people who wrote these books, which have had a great deal of power over the global human consciousness for hundreds of years, were simply deluded, or that they were simply just hallucinating stuff. That doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense to me that they were actually seeing something that's there. That would make sense to me. To simply just dismiss them, it's like, well, they lived a few thousand years ago. They don't have iPhones video cameras and drones like we do. They don't understand science like we do. I think this view that Ken Wilber calls the pre-trans theory, that anything that is understood to be supernatural is a lower order of consciousness, that is a lower order of evolution. I think that's, as Ken Wilber said, that's a really big mistake. And it seems to me that the people who saw these supernatural beings, the celestial beings, they were, in essence, they would have been shamans or priests, or they would have been visionaries. And they probably had if you think back, they probably had an understanding and an ability to categorize and interpret and work with these entities and beings. And when you keep taking these compounds, you start to have experiences where you begin to experience, I think, elements that you've read before, that you've come across before. I had an experience recently where I took a boga and I encountered a very large demon. It was very intense and spoke like a Roman general at double speed with a lot of fury and anger. And my thought about this being was, I don't know how to deal with him. He's too big, he's too powerful. What am I gonna do? I don't think I can fight this guy. He's got me. And I wasn't, funnily enough, I wasn't scared. I think instinctually I wasn't scared. But I ended up in a place that was obviously hell. And it was hell because, well, I didn't end up there. It's like the demon threw me into it. And there were chasms, and it was quite deep. It was like it was deep down into the earth. It was very dark, it was very dank. And I saw some horrible things there. I don't really want to share with you all. It's a bit too scary and crazy. But needless to say, it was a terrifying, horrible place. And I still wasn't actually I was scared. I wasn't shaking, but I was feeling like, wow, this being's really, really, really got me. And so at one point I kind of surrendered in this place, in this hell. And I got a good apprehension of this being, this devil. And it was quite an incredible experience, actually. This ray of white light came from my heart. Did I experience the love for this demon? Maybe I recognized its divine nature. Maybe I saw something in it that was so incredibly powerful, and perhaps it used to be an angel. I recognized it as an expression of a very intense form of divinity, very extremely intense. The intensity of this being is I've never experienced it, and I felt immense compassion and love for this being, and it sobbed and it became tearful, and it turned soft, so it became more like is Bullwinkle the moose in Rocky and Bullwinkle. It became more like that, and then just sort of dissolved away, and I was free. So these sorts of experiences, you have these sorts of experiences, and then there's a bit of data to grapple with. There's something to really think about here. And it really it really brings you to ask a lot of questions about reality. But there's some, for me at least, there was some really bad news and some really good news as well. And Graham Hancock, in his TED Talk, a lot of people overlook this. His quite well-known TED Talk that TED took down. Actually, the basis of his talk, he talked about hell, and the ayahuasca would tell him that he would go to hell if he kept smoking cannabis. So I've had many different experiences of hell over the years, and the hell realm. The astral reality becomes the evident reality that you live in. But also for me, the empowering part was that I was able to defeat this demon not through fighting and warfare, and not through some sort of cheesy, token expression of love, but an actual that love became the liberating factor, the freeing factor. And this is something that is quite often communicated. I think in this day and age, a lot of people have almost no experience of love in a metaphysical sense whatsoever. And that reality might be very confronting. I can only say what I've experienced, and many people, the poets and artists from time immemorial, can only say what they've experienced. And I've had many experiences where I've met beings that I've actually seen depicted in movies, for example. Like I've encountered a being who was a dead ringer for the alien out of the Alien movies. Not quite exactly the same, but very, very similar. And I read a quote from, I did some research on this and tried to find out, okay, because my thought was, I don't reckon that I'm actually projecting that idea of H.R. Geiger. I reckon H.R. Geiger was onto something and he was inspired. And H.R. Geiger died earlier this year, actually, for those of you who don't know. And I read a quote, I might be paraphrasing a little, where he says, some people think that I draw and paint from the imagination or fantasy. That is not true. I paint from reality. So I also had an experience of seeing a creature who was a dead ringer for Jabba, Jabba the Hutt. So again, I did some research, and it turned out that the guy Phil Tippett, who did who creates the creatures for Star Wars, is actually a tripper who uses LSD to inspire him. He takes very high doses of LSD to gain the inspiration for the creatures he sees. So I believe that a lot of these beings, they have an archetypal resonance for us because they actually exist in an etheric form, and they influence us. And again, we come back to the fear of, or I'm feeling a sense of, I don't know, I think a lot of people are afraid of talking like this because they're scared of the derision, the ridicule. But I can only say what I've reported. And like I said, what I'm communicating about supernatural beings is supernatural beings are reported and recorded throughout pretty much all traditional cultures on planet Earth. And perhaps before the Europeans were ripped from their pagan roots and converted to Christianity, that perhaps the pagan Europeans had a deeper understanding of an ecology of beings. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did have an understanding that they were living among many other beings. The Romans certainly did, and they had quite an advanced civilization. So another part of dealing with psychedelic realities is it can take a lot of time to process what you experience. You can, for myself, it's taken me 6 months sometimes to really process the ramifications and to really come to terms with what I've experienced. And there's been times, especially when I first started out, when I was 18, you know, there were times when I understood there was much more than I was being told, that reality was much bigger, that I ascertained there was a metaphysical reality. I remember when I was 18 and I took 400 mics, I couldn't move for like 2 weeks. I didn't do anything. I was almost, I wasn't quite comatose, but I was unable to move or speak too much. I was just so shocked. I was so shocked. And this is another aspect of it, that what we do experience can be quite shocking. It can even be traumatic, that what we experience, especially you smoking DMT in larger doses, it can be really traumatic for the individual, and to have the revelation of higher consciousness in a form of consciousness that might not be able to handle or process that data very well. It can appear to be too much. It can be difficult to digest that and to process that. So I think I've said pretty much what I wanted to say, and I can take time to ask some questions, answer some questions. All right, we have 10 minutes.
Experience of taking the cannabis as a negative form of leading towards the direction of hell, but still in shamanic tradition, like 1,000 years, the cannabis also was like a conductive tool to work with the thin matters. I mean, if you can a bit unfold your opinion.
As cannabis is a tool for exploration, I've not really, compared to the tryptamines, it doesn't seem to really do the job, as you know, as far as I understand. But I guess if you keep pushing the dose and you have the intention, you could go quite far. But it's not something that's widely reported among cannabis users and heavy cannabis users.
Maybe like just my position is that each one of us has his settings of energies. Maybe his lead, his like conductive plant is also personal. Maybe for you it's like the highway to take DMT. For the others, the highway is open through another stalkers, you know. Living persons, the living spirits, the plant spirits.
Oh, you're saying so, like endogenous experience of spirits?
Subjective. The cooperation with the spirits is depends on each one's priorities, energetic bases, you know, energetic strong points around which you build your trip, basically.
Oh yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for that inspiration, sharing your insights. Coming back a little bit to the culture which is built around that experience, and I think it's a very significant that we are now at the moment. So we are on a path which is already from a very, very long tradition part of the human mankind developing. So having the sacred plants as a dimension of reaching and higher consciousness connection to bring it back to the community, to share it as an impulse for growing the society, the tribe, the connection. Nowadays we are in the shift from the individual culture, which is taking psychedelics to have an individual trip, to get an individual inspiration, towards back to the community. We're having these tribal gatherings, we're having much more the culture, which is bringing back the people together. And what we are leaking a little bit is this communication channels, what you're already trying to mention here, how to make the wisdom, the inspiration, the visions which are collected through this shamanic experience back an inspiration for the tribe, for the community. So for example, we have here the gathering, which is very much about psychedelics, about the music, about the experiences, and the question would be, where is the circle to meet, about the visions which are collected through that space and time here, which would be a growing moment for the community, which is established in that present of time coming here together. So the question would be, according to processing the data, how much the community should be more involved into that carrying of the vision which is collected on that path, rather than have an individual experience. So strongly believing that the vision is a universal vision. So it's giving as a gift to the one who is entering that space, the sacred space of meeting the spirits or the sacred consciousness.
Well,
how to make the bridge to the serving that the community
part of this is just talking about your experiences and sharing your experiences with other people and not being afraid of being ridiculed. And also some people can be quite condescending and say, well, that was just a hallucination, dude, you just took some heavy drugs, or wow, maybe you should consider upping your medication, or something like this, you know. I think that people, you know, I think it's important to share your experiences, but also what we're really going to change is the mindset of people to, like, the basic point of my talk, and it's so simple, is that we're moving into an expanded evolutionary model, right? And there's so much that we don't know. So let's explore and understand and talk about what we don't know, and try and interpret it, try and you know, really take it seriously. And the more people who go deep and really do this, the more we have a dialogue, the more we can really talk about it, and you know, really navigate in a more conscious, coherent way in our lives and in our human consciousness.
When we put the message in the center rather than the vehicle, how to travel, or rather than the aha, wow, it feels so great to connect to the message, then we become something like more driven towards something which can uplift. So what could be more hosting the message would be the question. What kind of experiences after to have it integrated?
Well, this is I think a big part of where we're at. Like I said, the integration is so important. A lot of people are having all kinds of wild experiences now, especially in the last 10 years. And it's really important to integrate your experiences and come to terms with them. And rather than reducing your experiencing, rather than I think there's something really important saying, I don't know, or I don't understand this, or what was that about, rather than, oh, immediately trying to pinpoint it, immediately trying to understand or ascertain. I think there's great power in just letting it be what it is, and then just digesting it for what it is, and suspending belief and disbelief. I think that's really important. You don't need to, you know, to actually suspending disbelief. Doesn't mean you believe it. It just means you're digesting the experience and the meaningfulness of it, just like a dream. And I'm not saying that these experiences are just dreams, like some people seem to think that, oh, just waking dreams. It's not how they appear to me. They appear in lots of different ways, but they certainly appear meaningful and certainly communicate to me about the nature of this reality and other realities, and reality of consciousness itself. So I think it's important to keep in mind, you know, right, what's meaningful, what moves me, what brings me to tears, what touches me. If it was all just being created in the mind or in the brain, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, this idea that this is actually what's occurring, I just can't get my head around it. It's just so illogical.
He said, concerning the smoking changa just here at this festival, I see that the changa is smoked on the tents, in the camping, under the roofs. But I see also what for me is a strange behavior. That is, it is smoked a lot, also just on the main floor. I would like to know your opinion, if you have, concerning this behavior.
I think whenever you see some changa wafting through the changa smoke wafting through the crowd, and keep in mind a little bit goes a long way. It's useful to try and find the person who's smoking and ask them what they're getting out of it and why they're doing it. And I think you'll find that a lot of the people you talk to are a lot more conscious than you might expect. You might think, oh, they're just trying to get high, but actually it's a bit intense, actually, smoking changa on the dance floor. And a lot of the people I know I've talked to, they're often the people who are most able to integrate the experience. And for them, the dance floor is a place of celebration, and they want to do it where they feel most at home and where they're having the most fun, and they want to integrate that experience. So I don't have any judgment about people and how they're doing it myself. I met one woman who she doesn't take any other drugs, that she smokes changa on the dance floor because it helps her dance. Doesn't drink alcohol, doesn't smoke cannabis, nothing. So you never know until you go talk to the person. So that's what I recommend. And sure, you might meet some pretty loose units out there as well. But you know, I don't see any point having any judgment about it. People can do what they do. You can't, like, you know, where do we put? Is it our right to take the loose units and tighten their screws, and where do we return them to the factory to reset the firmware? You know, doesn't anything works like that.
Well, I just wanted to co-sign some of the things that you said about the alien and different creatures, because I've encountered that creature also, and me co-signing it, I guess we're already associated as friends, so that doesn't kind of be in the negative on your part. But I think that a lot of times what you said was that most people, even though they may take whatever they're taking for decades, have never really taken an entheogenic dose of what it is, whatever they're taking. We haven't taken the doses that will crash everything that we understand and put us in a place where there's absolutely no reference point. You know, and a lot of things, we talk about integration. That's integration on those types of doses that are integratable. But really, the entheogenic dose has no integration in the human dynamic. It is not human.
Yeah.
And that's what I've said over the years, is that these things as tools for exploration, not for medicine, not for, I'm having difficulty, and, I may have some sexual trauma, I may, have depression and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. You can integrate that. But these things are to become more than the human.
Yeah.
The human is not the goal. It's not the goal to bring it back for the community. Everything that you do in reality is done alone. It is done alone and it's done in darkness. And my expression of this is in the places that I've been that I've gleaned these experiences from. You know, people talk about the oneness of the universe, how we're all one and everything is one, and there's a universal consciousness. There are things out there that are standalone. In other words, they stand separate from everything else. There's no connection to them at all, absolutely. No connection. No universal mind, no universal this, all of that New Age stuff from Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and the Rosicrucians and all those. There are standalone systems that are out there that are absolutely different and so far away from the things that we can even conceive that it's absolutely ridiculous to say that these things are part of the dynamic that we're in. So yes, I understand exactly what you're talking about, being in those type of places. Places that are so extremely different and so extremely dark, dungeon-like, that there's absolutely nothing that you can say that can be brought back into integrated into being a human being. Now, to be a superior being in the singularity of which we know absolutely nothing about, I can see that. But the things that I see and the doses that I'm taking, and I'm not saying that I'm anything different. All you got to do is take the dose. You know? All you got to do is take the dose. And you can go into those places that are absolutely, incredibly so different from what our paradigm is, that you understand this. It has nothing to do with being human. You can't bring it back here into the dance floor. You can't bring it back into this stuff. It ain't nothing you can do with it.
Well, that's it. I think what you were saying about the Theosophists, and a lot of people have this cosmology, which I think is very presumptuous. As the first thing, what did Plato say? The first thing I realized when I was enlightened is that I didn't know anything. And I think that it's really important to let go of any presumption and just go into this with a clear slate and receptivity, and then you're going to find some interesting stuff. And I think what Kalindi was saying about just experiencing the alien for its own sake, that's, completely valid. And that like that demon that I saw, it was it was quite something. It's there wasn't anything particularly benevolent about it. It's like a manifestation of malevolence. And I think, I appreciate what Kalindi said over the years, because we have this kind of namby-pamby kind of new agey view, which doesn't really take into account that, wait on here, there's a lot of stuff in our reality that is very dark and very dangerous, and you can see this in the natural world, and as below, so above. It's there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think what all this brings me to is that it makes me more serious about my life. It makes me pay more attention, be more on the ball, and get my shit together. And there's a lot of people just dragging their feet, dragging their tails, whatever it is. And I think there's these medicines that they can really bring you to get a whole lot more serious about your life and what you're doing on planet Earth.